Hey friends, thanks for joining me. Welcome to the 5th episode of the Dandelion Seed podcast. I can't even believe it. Here we are, episode 5. I'm your host, Rachel. Today I want to talk about seasons of friendships. And I know y'all are going to be right here with me on this journey because it's a hard lesson to learn that sometimes friends are only for a season. And then, of course, there's the ones who stick with you closer than a brother, as the Bible says. If you haven't gotten caught up with my story, go have a listen to episodes 1 through 4, where I give you the nitty-gritty details of the worst few years of my life, where we were jobless, we were homeless, we got kicked out of a foreign country, we crashed our camper van, which was our only house, and we were unofficially evicted by my very family who took us in during those hard times. You don't want to miss it. It's not boring. I can promise you that. So if you've listened to any of these episodes at all, you know my story a little bit. You know my husband was a military pilot in the Marine Corps for 21 years when we were unexpectedly and abruptly disjoined from the military. It wasn't a dishonorable discharge or anything like that. It's just that when you get to a certain level in the military, there are big promotions at stake, and they are highly, highly competitive. And so this led to a whole chain of events that were quite catastrophic in our lives, a snowball, if you will. And you may recall that it was a doctor's unnecessary intervention that catapulted my husband's entire military career into the toilet. I don't normally think you use the word catapult and toilet in the same sentence, but I just did it. But that's exactly what happened. Let's just say the doctor's arrogance and ignorance, it really just didn't do much for my opinion of modern medicine anyways, which of course COVID sealed the nail in the coffin, and I could go on and on, but that is a topic for another day. So let's get back on track. So because of this doctor, honestly, I want to blame the doctor, but really it was the Lord's plan. But because of the situation, we found ourselves ousted from the military by a failure to promote. And so that's the gist of it. And you can hear those gory details in episode 2. It was not a very fun time in life. Well, anyone familiar with military life knows you move constantly. Of course, some of you have not experienced this, and it's interesting. It's an interesting life because you are continually saying goodbye to old friends, hugging them and crying one day, and then you're making new friends the next day, and you're just doing this over and over again. Now, when you're stationed overseas, there's a very unique thing that happens that doesn't happen very much in the USA. It's a much, much closer bond amongst the community living overseas. I suppose because all of you Americans are all just sort of thrust into this fishbowl together. For us, we were in Japan. So we were clear on the other side of the globe from our family. We were far from friends, from all of the people who've ever known us or loved us in our entire lives. So on top of that, in Japan, there's a major time difference. So it makes calling home super difficult. It makes traveling home even more difficult. It's like 24 to 48 hours in airports and sitting on planes, often with very young children. The sheer distance and length of travel makes it virtually impossible to rush home for family emergencies. You find yourself almost cut off from anyone and everything you've ever known and loved when you're living on the other side of the world. And if that's not enough of a challenge, well, you're in Japan especially, a very foreign culture. And so here we are, several hundred American families all just thrown onto a base together, the size of which is only just a few square miles. I mean, you can easily walk around this military base. And so you're living on top of one another. I mean, you are literally sharing walls and ceilings with people that you live and work with for years on end. Some of the people living there even shared vehicles. You shop at the same grocery store. Everybody goes to the same post office. You'll see your neighbors at the food court and at the gym and at the dentist office. You go to church with them. You take turns pushing swings at the playground and your kids all play sports together. And then, of course, your husbands are never, ever, ever home. So that means you become each other's babysitters and travel partners and prayer warriors, and you kind of just jump in because all of these people living in Japan are all in the same fishbowl with you. So very, very quickly, they become your lifeline. It's like an instant community, unlike any place I have ever been in the United States. I had one friend, he was a chaplain, and I feel like he summed it up perfectly. He said, Iwakuni, that's where we lived in Japan. Iwakuni is like, friendships in Iwakuni are like dog years. So for every 1 year that you know somebody in Iwakuni, it's as if you've known them for 7. And that is absolutely true. I mean, you watch people go through their bad parenting moments. You help them walk through losses and crises and homesickness like you wouldn't believe. You witness their marital spats because there's nowhere to hide. You've heard all the gossip. You've been frustrated by their children. Then you learn to quickly forgive because that are all you have. There is no room to hold grudges. And on top of all that, there's this aspect of venturing off of the base to go explore a very foreign culture. And you're trying to navigate to foreign destinations and all the cultural experiences that come with that. Nobody back home in the United States can ever reminisce with me about the Kintai Kyo or the Cherry Blossom Festival or the time we took a wrong turn with 5 kids in the car and we ended up stuck in a Japanese man's driveway. That was fun, you know? So when you're living on a foreign base overseas, you're learning daily how to live life in a way you have never done it before. And you're doing it side by side with other people who are also learning it too. So you become incredibly close, incredibly fast with the people that are there because you have to. In 3 short years, I developed deep and strong relationships with some amazing homeschooling Christian women. And because we were so close and also so inseparable, I sincerely believe they were going to be my friends forever. Now, one thing about me, I'm one of those people that once I pick you up in my life, that's it, you're my friend. And even though sometimes it might be months or even years between talking, you never cease to be close in my heart. That's just how I operate. Well, it was a very hard lesson to learn that not everybody operates that way. And I also learned that just because you're inseparably close to someone in one season, and we're talking like really sharing your heart, sharing your life, praying deeply for each other. It doesn't mean that when that season ends, the friendship will continue. I mean, some people do just move on. I mean, like nothing happened. And that's shocking to me because I don't operate that way. At least I would never be intentionally doing that to anyone. And I didn't understand it. And it hurt a lot. So I want to dive a little deeper and just tell you the story. I had one friend in particular who I was very, very, very close to. Interestingly enough, when my husband's career in the Marine Corps ended, her husband's did too, at the very exact same time. The difference between her life and mine is that our military life ended while we were living overseas, and hers ended while she was living in the United States. For those of you who don't know, retiring out of an international post is the worst possible scenario when you're getting out of the military. I mean, in a whirlwind, they just swoop in, they pack up your house, they stick you on an airplane, they send you home. Except you've been living internationally, so you don't have a home. You don't have a house. You probably don't have a car. In our case, we didn't. We'd sold our cars. You don't have a job because his job had ended in Japan, but we didn't have anything when we were returning home. So you're pretty much just washed up on American soil. And the Marine Corps is like, don't let the door hit you on the way out. So you've lost your friends. You've lost your community. You've lost your church. You've lost everything. You literally don't know what end is up. It is the worst possible way to retire. I can say that from experience. And there's a lot more details I can get into, but you get the point. Contrast that to a person who retires when they're living in the United States. In both instances, you have roughly 3 months notice that your job is being terminated. Now, while the international family is busy packing their house, making travel plans to include overseas pet travel, an enormous ordeal taking a dog and a cat and booking airplane tickets and rabies vaccines and all the nonsense, the family in the United States, well, they're already settled. Let's just say they own their house. Perhaps they bought it a few years prior. Not only do they have no urgency to pack up and move, they likely have made a bundle of money on the equity of their house. They have the option to cash in and sell it, or they can simply stay put and find a job locally. Either way, they have a roof over their head or a nest egg so they can go find another roof. The international family has neither one of those things. Furthermore, the family in the United States can use their terminal leave. So that's leave that you accumulate. So when you're going to retire out of the military, you can cash all these days off in. and you can just not show up to work for the last 6 weeks or so. And you can use that time to look for housing, to go on job interviews, and all kinds of valuable things. It's really easy for a person retiring when they're already in the United States to shop for civilian business attire. They can go travel for interviews, like I said, and they can make phone calls during working hours. Remember, we're in Japan. You had to get up at 3:00 in the morning to make phone calls, and it's not easy. Generally, you can jumpstart the career shift process if you're in the United States. But by the time an international family arrives back in the United States and they're jet lagged and they're homeless, the stateside family has now seamlessly stepped into their new career. And believe me when I tell you, you can do the same job outside of the military as inside, and you're going to get 2 to 3 times as much salary. So they could have a very seamless transition. So in the case of my very, very dear friend, when they retired, they made a huge amount of money on the sale of their house. It was more than enough for them to go through their transition period. In fact, they did so well, they bought a horse farm. Complete for herself and the kids. They all got horses. Meanwhile, I'm living in the desert, literally on a dirt pile in a tin can with no running water, peeing in a bucket. And if you haven't heard that story, check out episode 4. The only thing that was different between my friend's retirement and ours is that where they retired from and where we retired from, they were set up to perfectly transition seamlessly into a civilian life with ease and with money. And we were thrust into poverty with no house, no car, no nothing. The military literally just stuck us on a plane like fugitives and threw us out of Japan. And it has taken us 11 years to get back to a state of normalcy. And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that. So this very, very, very close friend of mine, she stepped right into her best life. And they had their house money. They had a beautiful home. They had a good job. They had horses, for crying out loud. So was there a little bit of envy on my part? Yeah. You know what? I grew up riding horses. I always dreamed of providing that kind of life for my kids. I always wanted a homestead of some sort. I wanted my boys to work around animals and grow a garden because that's what I did growing up. And I felt like it was important that a kid needs to grow up knowing how to do something real. So in my mind, growing food, caring for animals, that's real in the sense of real responsibility. There are real things at stake. It develops real life skills and character building. A huge amount of character building when you grow up this way. I know because that's how I grew up. And it formed a lot of who I am. And so I always, always, always wanted to provide that for my children. But instead we had this military life, and we were living on jet bases, and we were going to air shows, and we were around military guys and aircraft and Japanese culture. And we were always traveling. It was just a different life. It was really exciting. It was wonderful. But bam, that chapter ended in a hot second. And then we were destitute. And like I said, living in an RV, no running water, peeing in a bucket in the desert. It was just awful. So here I have this one singular friend who has undergone the same job loss, the same shock, the same grief, the same emotional burden. And yet that friend was simply able to step from one life into the other. So yeah, I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some envy there. But there wasn't any envy initially because I thought we had camaraderie. Her husband had gotten passed over for promotion. My husband had gotten passed over. And we were really, really close friends. We'd spent years lockstep together. We had prayed together. We went to church together. We raised our kids together. We shared dinner together. We did all these things. And now our husbands had both been forced out together. We had the same pain point. And I thought that would be a point of connection. But guess what? Her life transition was seamless. Her outlook was entirely positive and optimistic. First of all, she wanted out of the military. She was excited to move back home. Exiting the military was the opportunity she craved. She wanted a bright and exciting future outside of the military. Unlike my friend, I had grown to love military life. I love Japan. I didn't want to get out. I didn't want anything to change because I was very happy and content how it was. So it felt like crashing and burning to me. And even though both of our husbands were in the same position at the exact same time, our respective transition from one season to the next was radically different. I mean, if you look at these two things in parallel, it's not even remotely the same story. So here I am reaching out to this friend like, oh man, I'm really going through a hard time right now. And her response is, oh, everything's rainbows and unicorns over here. And I got a pony, right? Like that's the last thing you need to hear from somebody, especially when you're peeing in a plastic bucket. And when I say that, guys, I literally was doing that. It was bad. I mean, that is where we were in life. I mean, we had a roof over our head. It was a rubber roof. We had wheels under our floor. It was an RV, but we didn't have indoor plumbing and it was crazy. So what I learned in that moment is that friends are sometimes only for a season. This friend just could not handle my grief and my angst and my loss. And she just could not handle the radical implosion of my life. It was too much for her. Because her life was all falling neatly into place and mine was falling exponentially apart. And she just simply didn't know what to do with it. So even though we had walked through all of these years together and she had counseled me and I had counseled her, and even though we had the same pain point together, we could not relate anymore because in that pain point, we were having two completely different experiences. I mean, they were night and day different, and she absolutely could not relate to mine. And the only way I could relate to hers was with envy and upset because ours was so hard and hers was so easy. And so I learned that some friendships are for a season and that's it. Ouch. Oh, I mean, people drift in and out of our lives all the time. But what has taken me years to come to terms with is sometimes people you love and trust, they just can't handle your hard. They don't have what it takes. Maybe it scares them. Maybe they don't know what to say. Maybe they're not strong enough to handle your emotional space. Maybe they can't handle you wrestling with God. And I didn't understand that. I didn't understand why you could walk so closely with someone and then when you hit a hard point, they just disappear out of your life. Well, it happens, and I'm sure you know it, and it feels terrible. So I learned a lot. When I was homeschooling my kids, I would always say, whatever your situation is, whatever upsets you about a person, take a lesson from it and learn the things that hurt and you don't like and decide not to be like that person. Now, I know that people go through seasons where they're negative or they're frustrated. In my case, I was really, really struggling in my faith and I was really doubting God because everything just kept going from bad to worse to even worse and to the worst. And I guess my friend just could not handle the destruction that was happening in my life. Now, listen, it wasn't me destroying my life, right? Like I wasn't drinking or gambling or making bad decisions. It was all external things that just kept happening to us. And they were completely outside of my control. And so I was grappling with the why of it. Why? Why did God let this happen? Why is this happening to us and not her? Why? And she could not handle it. So peace out. She was gone. And it took me years to get over that because I didn't understand what had happened. Whatever her own emotional stuff was, she could not deal with mine. So yeah, seasons in life change, and part of the changing season is friends. And some will drift in and out of your life, while others you'll find will walk through fire with you. And you don't always know which friend is which until the trials come. So I was hurt and angry and bitter against this friend who abandoned me. I mean, in my own pain, I just could not understand how much my heaviness intimidated her. It's funny how years give you such perspective. I began to realize that I was expecting her to carry the weight of my pain instead of giving my pain to the Lord. After all, God was the one I was angry with. After my heart started to heal, I began to understand how much my personal backsliding terrified her. And so I no longer harbor any resentment towards this person, even though she totally failed me. But what was she going to do anyways? Well, I want to wrap this all up by saying sometimes, not always, in fact, it's often rare, but sometimes the Lord will give you pieces of closure, especially when he knows your heart has come to the right place. So this same friend, the one I just discussed, the one I was so hurt by, who I felt abandoned by, she recently wrote to me after many years had gone past. I mean, for a long while, I would reach out to her and I'd get nothing. I would never get a response. It was like I didn't even exist anymore. Or I'd get these little short one-word answers. Like, I even went out of my way to visit her on a road trip that I was on in an attempt to try to have some closure, but even that fell flat. So I just stopped trying, and I just was confused and lost and sad. And then years and years and years and years after I visited her on that road trip, she reaches out to me via text. And she sends me this whole long message. I mean, it was just text, right? But it was like, I'm really grateful for our time that we had together in Japan. You taught me so much about the Lord. And I'm like, haven't heard from her in years. And I thought I never would again. And I had honestly just let her drop completely out of my mind. I'd given her over to God and been like, oh, well. And so I get this message out of the blue and I'm like, what? I taught you about the Lord? What? Me? Huh? And then she starts telling me that everything had gone awry in her marriage and none of it was her fault. It was his. And it was a big, ugly season of her life that I knew nothing about because she certainly didn't reach out and tell me. Well, she did reach out in the end when everything was said and done. Unfortunately, they did have to get divorced. He was unrepentant of a lot of things. And it was very, very sad. It was tragic. And I felt terrible for her. Because I know that she was gaga over her husband. She loved that man way stronger than I was capable of loving my own husband. Like, I admired her just admiration and love that she had for her husband. It was like, and so this had to have been the single most crushing thing, his unfaithfulness and all of it that could ever possibly have happened in her life. Similar to how crushed I was, by what happened to us in that season of transition. But she reached out and said, if it hadn't been for me in Japan and all those times we spent together with prayer and scripture, as somehow in Japan, I had girded up her faith and her walk with the Lord. Like somehow she had seen me as this kind of spiritual giant. Listen, I am not, I can assure you. But I didn't know that she wasn't one. I didn't know that. She said she was grateful for me because of my faith and because of the words that I spoke and the prayers that I prayed and how I helped her grow her faith in the Lord in a way she never would have. I mean, I was just like blindsided. Like, wait, what? Me? Hold on a second. All those years in Japan, I was just being me. I mean, I don't know. I'm nothing special. And then she said, and I quote, I would not have survived this divorce or all of this devastation and all of this betrayal and trauma if it had not been for the seeds that you planted years ago. I mean, this was like a decade ago in Japan. Now, listen, the Lord did not have to give me that little nugget of insight into her life. I mean, I could have just left in limbo, always wondering whatever happened to that friendship. Only once I had come to closure about it and I had let go of hurt and anger and bitterness in my heart. Yes, there was always a tinge of sadness, but it wasn't bitterness. Only then did the Lord allow me to see who I had been in her life and how hard it was for her when I was fumbling in my own faith. So it's a beautiful picture of how you just never know what kind of seeds you're going to plant. You never know how close you might be to uprooting those seeds that you planted. I mean, it was a really great lesson for me. So to bring full circle this idea of seasons, the Lord was gracious with me. He gave me closure and he offered me insight as to why a certain season had ended. But the forgiveness in my heart had to come first before he would allow me to see the why. Because it was my heart he was working on. It was my heart that was doubting God in the first place. It was my heart that was kicking against the goads for nearly 10 years. And only when my heart was right and good, and it took 10 years because, man, I'm really stubborn and I don't learn fast. After that point, the Lord finally said, okay, now you're finally in a position where your heart isn't hard. Let me show you why something happened. Let me show you how you influenced somebody in this amazing way. And let me show you why she couldn't handle you coming unglued at the seams and wrestling with your faith. It was such a gift from him. So these are the seeds that we hold on to, the seeds that take root in the gardens of our souls, because it's what we need when the winds come and buffet us and blow us left and right and sideways. We need seeds of truth. These lessons that he allows us to see. What are those things that we can take away from the friends that have ditched us and the friends that stick by us? Both of those friendships have lessons in them. And just like winter and spring and fall, each season affects the garden differently. Every friendship is a season, and it affects our hearts in much the same way. So that's really what I want to hop on here and share with you. I thank you so much for listening. I think that pretty much wraps up podcast 4 of the Dandelion Seed podcast. Thank you so much for listening to my heart and my stories, and I hope you got something out of this today. I don't know where the seeds will blow next week, but Lord willing, we will be back here together for more of this journey. So thanks for listening. Talk with you soon.